an individual divorce is the wise thing to do. Maybe I should say the lesser evil. You know, Yahweh is divorced, but there are things he hates even more, such as you being seduced into idolatry. Remember Solomon, King Solomon, the wisest man on earth, was seduced into idolatry by his pagan wives. If even Solomon was seduced and sinned, well, are we better and stronger than Solomon? Don't think so. Don't think so. So all of Scripture confirms this. So I do not believe those teaching that you need to remain single. If you have a divorce, you must remain single for an undetermined period of time, that is, according to this theory, until your previous spouse dies. Well, it's false. It's not scriptural. Yahweh is an Elohim of righteousness and of love. In the Old Testament, an adulterer could have been put to death. The faithful spouse could remarry, in theory, the next day, so to speak. Because as soon as the adulterer was dead, of course, as Scripture says, you're bound to your legal marriage, let's say, as long as your spouse is alive. Once your spouse dies, you are free to remarry. So it makes no sense to say that now we do not put the adulterer to death, and consequently you, the innocent party, you are punished. We show forgiveness to the sinner, who can do whatever he or she wants. He or she is an adulterer anyway, so they ole ole ole, they can do what they want. But the innocent party is punished with lifelong celibacy. If you don't believe that this is severe punishment, well then read Scripture again, read how sad women were if they had no children. If they were married, for instance, and they could not have children. Remember how sad Jephthah's daughter was, because her father made this rash vow of devoting her, of sacrificing her to Yahweh, meaning he could not give her away anymore to another husband. Remember how sad she was, and even it became sort of, at least for some time, a festival in Israel, that they were wailing over Jephthah's daughter's permanent virginity due to this rash vow. So don't tell me that this is not a severe punishment, forbidding someone to get married for decade after decade after decade. That's a severe punishment, and this is not the Elohim that we serve, because this is simply not righteous. This is letting the guilty party go and punishing the unguilty party. That's not how Yahweh works. So again, no more questions? You can still ask questions later on.
Okay.
Privately.
Maybe later.
I think it's all answered right now, but
I understand there may be questions that are too private to be answered from the pulpit. So you can also approach me for more private questions if there is such a need.
okay, the ends and the closing song. Let's stand up for the closing song.
Kayla, Yana, closing song, closing song na.
Day of Wilaya. 2:18.
Yeah.
And Yahweh Elohim said, "It is not good for the man to be alone. I am going to make her a helper for him as his counterpart."
So it's not good for a man to be alone. So Paul is aware of this verse in scripture. That's why he says it's better to marry than to burn. If you burn, it's certainly not good to stay alone. In this country we enjoy religious freedom, so distress is now, at this time, not a reason to stay unmarried. However, if someone prefers to stay unmarried, to serve Yahweh full time, that's fine, that's excellent. Huh? There is no obligation to get married, in other words. Married believers cannot divorce except for whoring. Remember last week I already pointed out that in a certain translation this exception is mistranslated as instead, except for even if there is whoring, but that is simply not in line with the original text. It contradicts the original text. And it contradicts a host of passages in the Old Testament and in the New Testament. So married believers cannot divorce except for whoring, which refers to idolatry. I feel it refers mainly to idolatry, which is a forbidden relation with other Elohim. And whoring also refers to a forbidden relation with another person, such as a close relative, brother, sister, or adultery, or a marriage to an unbeliever when you are a believer. So this is talking about a man and a woman who are believers when they marry, but the wife starts whoring after marriage and actually ceases to be a believer. And of course, as we saw a couple of times, it works both ways. Believing husband, unbelieving wife, or unbelieving husband and believing wife. Works both ways. Paul also talks about a situation where both were unbelievers at the time of marriage. Remember, to the rest I say. Should I again point out, I say, again, it's not a contradiction to what Joshua said, but it means Joshua never dealt with this situation. He never talked to people who were both unbelievers at the time of marriage. That's why he says, I say, not the master, because the master never said anything about that topic. So, the situation where both were unbelievers at the time of marriage, and after marriage one spouse becomes a believer. They can stay married if the unbelieving spouse is willing to continue living in peace with the believer, which includes that they raise their children in the true faith. If not, the believing spouse can divorce and remarry. It's, let's say, it's his decision. He will need a lot of wisdom to know how much patience should I show, how long should I try to convert her, if you want, through my good example. So it will require a lot of wisdom. So he can divorce and remarry. Again, there is no obligation to immediately divorce and remarry, except, again, in certain situations. Remember Ezra 9 and 10. In certain situations, it must be done quickly, the divorce. And if the unbelieving spouse wants to divorce, the believer should not stop it. Not even try to stop it. And finally, whether a believer has been married before or not, he can only marry another believer. Marriages between believers and unbelievers are forbidden. They are not bound by Yahweh. Yahweh is against such marriages. Well, this is what I had to say, but maybe you still have questions. Do you still have questions? Did I answer all of them? One more thing I want to say. If you analyze it correctly, there is no contradiction, as we should expect, no contradiction between the Old Testament and the New. We must not think something like, it was allowed in the Old Testament, divorce I mean, and then Joshua came on the scene, and then suddenly it is no longer allowed. Well, no, that's nonsense. If it was allowed under certain circumstances in the Old Testament, well, that's Torah. Joshua did not come to do away with Torah, and that includes Deuteronomy 24, of course, obviously. Not one iota or one tittle of the law will disappear. That's what Joshua himself said. So let alone that suddenly 4 whole verses would disappear from Scripture. It's just not the case. Ezra 9 and 10 are there, It's also briefly mentioned in the book of Nehemiah, this mass divorce. Mass divorce.